Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Richard Schneeman. I want to introduce you to ActiveRecord. Previously, we've been talking about databases, storing data, using those databases, and we've also talked a little bit about using Ruby, Ruby strings, hashes, and classes. And we want to kind of put all of that together. So we want some way for our Ruby objects to be able to actually access our database and get information from it. So we want to use ActiveRecord. ActiveRecord is an ORM, an object relational mapper. So we are mapping relationships from our database onto actual Ruby objects. ActiveRecord is the ORM that Rails uses, so it is the ORM that we will be using in this class. There are plenty of other ORMs in existence that have some slightly different paradigms, but for the rest of this course, we will be using ActiveRecord. So let's get started. ActiveRecord, like Rails, follows a convention over configuration. So to tell a class that it is an ActiveRecord backed class, it needs to inherit from ActiveRecord base. Once we have done this, in this situation, we have a user class is going to automatically know to look in the user table in whatever database we pointed at. Once we have done this successfully, we can use ActiveRecord to create and insert data into our database. Here we call capital user.create, and then we pass in a name of Richard, a movie of Zoolander. Note that's just a hash without the curly braces, and we get back an object. ActiveRecord will automatically give us a primary key as well as populate with a created at and updated at timestamp. So once we have those elements in the database, we can query it. So user.where name #RocketRichard is going to be looking for all of the users that have a name of Richard, and we can pull out the first one of those. And if we assign that to a variable, then we actually have a user object. So you can call, if we assign it to a variable called rich, you can call rich.name and it will return Richard, and you can call rich.movie and it will return Zoolander, and that is all data that we got from the database. We can also see the SQL that ActiveRecord builds in the back end. So it does use a different engine to build the SQL, but here previously we were looking for users that were named Richard, so user.where name #RocketRichard. To SQL will actually return back the SQL that we would have had to manually generate ourselves. So select users.star from users where users.name equals Richard. I highly recommend that everyone know a good amount of SQL, but using an ORM and understanding the SQL that it generates can save you, quite a bit of time. Not only do we have the capability of passing in hashes like this, so passing in the key of name and the value that we're looking for, in this case Richard, we can also pass in strings of raw SQL. So we can be looking for a user that the movie is not null. So this would be pulling back any user that does have the movie field populated. We can do not null, we can do is null, we can do greater than, less than, not equal to. Anything that we can do in regular SQL, we can do using ActiveRecord. So it's just kind of a very loose wrapper for that relationship. So in order to see this in action, let's go ahead and we will be using Rails. So we're going to create a Rails demo, a new app. So you're more than welcome to follow along. First, we're going to enter in Rails new week 2 demo. I'm just going to All right, now this is going to go ahead and create all of the directory I need in order to run my project. If I list ls, then I can see that project. I'm going to want to cd into that project, and I can list again and see all of the different elements. Now I'm going to want to add a user to this project. So we're going to want to create a database entry. Let's go ahead and run Rails generate. We can also just run Rails G. It's just a shortcut for generate. Scaffold, and then into the scaffold we are going to be generating a user model. So we're going to put that, and then the user model is going to have a name, as well as we're going to store a movie. And since both of those are going to be strings, we don't have to, it will automatically know that it's a string, so we can leave that part out. If we wanted to name it something else, if we wanted to have an extra value such as fave number, we can give it a type, but by default it will assume it is a string, which is correct in this case. So let's go ahead and run that command. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open this in Sublime Text 2. You can use any text editor. Okay, here we've got the app open in Sublime Text 2. If I open the app directory, we can take a look at the models, and user.rb has this, it's the user class, and the user class is inherited from ActiveRecord base. We're also saying that the only attributes that we can access through mass assignment are movie and name. This is just kind of a security feature. The next thing we're going to want to look at is our migration. So in order to use a database, that database has to have a schema. So we have to tell our database, we have to create those columns, we have to create that table. So here we are creating a table called users, and into that table we are inserting a column called name. It's going to be a string, as well as a column called movie. It's also going to be a string, and then we're adding updated that and created that timestamps. So now we would just need to run this migration. Let's go back to our terminal. So rake db migrate. And you can see here it's creating users, creating the table, and now we can actually go in Rails console, or you can also abbreviate it just Rails C. And now we can create users. So user.create name Okay, here we go. You can tell since it created a ID on that, it did save, and we've got a name of Richie, movie Gone with the Wind. We've got a created that date, a updated that date, and you can actually see here in this development mode, I've actually got it turned on where it is telling me the SQL that it used to that it returns, so that it won't happen this way in production. But it's convenient to see what's actually going on. If I wanted to get that user, since I only have one in the database, I could call user.last. And notice this is capital user, and I do return Richie, so I can do user.last.name, and I get Richie, or .movie. We can assign that to a variable, and call that variable .name. And it's the same thing. If I don't know that, if I have more than one element in the database, I can search using where. Oops. I guess I used Richie, didn't I? There we go. There we go. So user.where name is equal to Richie is going to select users.star from users where user.name is equal to Richie. Exactly what we would expect. You can also view the SQL by doing to SQL, and you'll get the same thing. So there you go. That is using ActiveRecord in a very simple case. So again, we created the project, we went into that directory, then we made some users. We opened the project, we looked at the migration, it looked kind of like this. We created and migrated the database. Depending on the database you're using, you might not have to create it. I'm using SQLite in this case. I recommend developing using Postgres actually, but that might be for another time, and then you can migrate the database. Finally, we ran Rails console, and we were able to run user.create and user where, and then first you call all these different SQL queries on it. Okay, so in the first video of week 2, we were talking about relationships, and we talked about this relationships in between two different tables. So we had a car table and we had a user table, and we were able to get data in between the two by joins and using joins. So let's go ahead and see how in Rails we would do the exact same thing. So we're going to run Rails generate scaffold. We're going to pass in the model of car, and we're going to tell it that it belongs to a user. So user : belongs to. We're going to give it a condition, so that's going to be the condition of the car. We can specify string. Again, that's optional. And then we're going to pass in year as an integer, and that's the year that the car was created. So let's go ahead and run that right now. So we're going to exit from our console, the generator. We want to generate a scaffold. So we're going to do Rails generate. G is just a shortcut for that. Scaffold, and then a car. So the car is going to belong to a user. So we have user : belongs to, and then it's going to have a condition, and then it is going to have a year. So this is the year the car was created. We're going to want to store that as an integer. So go ahead and hit enter. And then we're going to double check. So here previously we had user, and this hasn't changed at all, but now if we open up car, it looks a lot like user did. It's still got that attr accessible, and it still inherits from ActiveRecord base, but obviously it's named car, and most importantly you'll see that it belongs to user. Here is how we are telling our model the relationship inside of our database. Now if we go and take a look inside of our migration, so into create cars, is going to be creating the table cars, and it's saying that the table belongs to a user, so it'll actually create a user ID field inside of cars. It will store a condition and a year, as well as adding timestamps, and this is pretty important for performance reasons. It is going to go ahead and automatically add an index to our car's user ID table. So this is going to be our foreign key that is looking at the user table to represent the relationship. Again, if you missed the part where I talked about relationships with database tables and foreign keys and primary keys, you might want to go back and watch the first section of week 2. So this is a migration just representing the schema. Now we actually need to go ahead and put that data into our database. So we'll go back. So we're going to run rakedb migrate. And here you can see that it knew we already had the users, so it didn't need to put that in there. We already had that migration run, and it created a table called cars, and it added an index on cars on the user ID field. So if we go into console, Rails console, or just Rails C is a shortcut for that. We still have user, and we can still do user first. But now we also have a car, and here's all the attributes for our car. But we haven't generated any cars yet, and we also, our user table doesn't know that it has cars. That we told a car that it belongs to a user, but a user doesn't know that it has many cars. So let's see. We can create a car. Create. It's going to have a year. It's going to be 2003. going to be a condition of okay. There you go. But we can query that car.last car.where condition. Okay. Okay.first. But if we call .user on it, it will return empty. We don't have a user for that car, and that makes sense if we take a look at the foreign key on this .user ID. It has a nil user ID on that. So let's, and also if we pulled up our last user, so user.last, we got Richie, and if we call .last.cars, we're going to get an error because users don't know about cars yet. We have to fix that. Let's exit out of IRB and go into our project. Here we need to go into user and tell it that it has cars. So has many cars. Now when we restart, it's going to reload our code. Rails C. We can just call user.last.cars and no errors. It knows it's automatically pulling up user, the last user, as well as searching where user ID. Once it pulls up that user, it's searching for cars where the user ID matches. So if you want, we can actually do Richie equals user.last. So this actually gets the last user, which happens to be named Richie. And we can call cars, so that's empty. But if we wanted to create some cars for Richie, we can go ahead and do that right here. So the year is going to be 2012, and condition is going to be awesome. Now, if we call Richie.cars, we get one car. And let me see, car.where ID is 2.first. If we call, so we can pull that car independently from the database, and it knows its user. So if we call that .user, it pulls up Richie. So a car has one user, and a user has many cars. You know, kind of makes sense. So now that we've got this, we can do some really powerful things. Just a little recap. We ran the scaffold command to generate the car, and then we viewed the cars. We migrated the database. We added has many to the user. And so finally, the user has many cars, and cars belongs to a user. And this is the relationship that we are storing. Again, this matches what we covered in the first part of week 2. There we go. So now that we have that relationship, we can actually, we've been using this where clause, so querying our database using where. Now we can also use joins. So here's an example of calling joins in a ActiveRecord SQL query. We're actually joining cars onto this, which isn't doing anything in this query, but you can just see it's kind of the simplest way that we can do this. So what if we wanted to find all of the users with awesome cars? Well, here's what we would do. We would take our user constant and call .joins on it. So we would joins cars to users, and then we would be looking at the cars, only the cars where the condition was equal to awesome. So here we go. It's going to be selecting users .star from users because we're using the user class, and then if you move on to the next part, the joins cars is going to represent the inner join of cars on cars.userid to users.id. There's an inner join and an outer join. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And then finally, it's going to use this where clause to form cars.conditions, or condition in our case, is equal to awesome. And that is going to pull back all of the users who have a car in awesome condition. So let's go ahead and actually try that in Rails. So user.joins cars where cars condition awesome. There you go. So we're going to actually get an array of those. If you just want the first one, you can call .first. If you want to count those, you can call .count. And as always, if you're curious about how we're doing it, you can just call .toSQL. So that is how we store relationships between models and objects in our database, and that is how we retrieve them using ActiveRecord in our ORM, and now we can use them in our application. So thank you very much for tuning in. Again, my name was Richard Schneeman. Have a great day.